The wooden house seemed to breathe easier these days, as if it too had learned what it meant to be loved. Morning light spilled softly through the bamboo grove, painting shifting patterns of gold across the garden. The gourd vines, once thin and struggling, now climbed confidently along the trellis Quan had helped repair with his large, careful hands. Dew still clung to the leaves, sparkling like tiny diamonds in the early sun. The air carried the fresh, green scent of wet earth, young bamboo shoots, and the faint sweetness of jasmine vines climbing the house walls. Tieu Lac stood on the porch barefoot, a simple white cotton ow dye flowing gently around her. The delicate fabric moved with the breeze, brushing softly against her skin. On her left hand, the engagement ring caught every ray of light, sending small sparks dancing across the wooden floor. Today was not going to be a grand city celebration with crystal glasses and loud music. Today was theirs, quiet, warm, and deeply rooted in the garden that had slowly become the witness to their love. She heard Quan's footsteps behind her before she saw him. He stepped onto the porch, tall and steady, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The morning sun highlighted the strong lines of his forearms. The same arms that had carried her through the rain lifted village children onto his back and held her so gently every night. His dark hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and when his eyes found her, the usual sharp focus of a CEO melted into something softer, warmer, more vulnerable. "You look like you were born from this garden," he said quietly, voice low and rough with morning huskiness. He stopped a few steps away, giving her space, but his gaze never left her face. Tieu Lac turned, a small smile curving her lips. She closed the distance between them and rested her palms lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. "And you look like a man who has finally learned how to stay," she whispered back. Rising onto her toes, she pressed a soft kiss to the corner of his mouth. "Thank you for doing this here. No fancy venue. Just the garden, the children, and us." Quan's hand came up to cup her waist, his thumb tracing a slow, soothing circle over the thin fabric, their silent language of comfort. "Anywhere with you feels like home now, Tieu Lac, even if I have to spend the whole morning pretending I know how to hang lanterns properly." They spent the morning turning the open space near the gourd trellis into something magical yet simple. Village women and a few close neighbors arrived early, their laughter mixing with the rustle of bamboo leaves. Long wooden tables were arranged under strings of silk lanterns in warm shades of orange, red, and soft gold, hung from low branches and bamboo poles. The children from the village ran barefoot between the vines, helping, or mostly creating joyful chaos, as they scattered fresh flower petals and small wild orchids they had picked from the forest edge. Tieu Lac's two closest friends from the city had driven up that morning. They hugged her tightly, eyes wide with wonder at the transformation of the once quiet garden. "This feels like a dream," one of them said, brushing a strand of hair from Tieu Lac's face. "You look happier than I've seen you in years." By midday, the garden had become a living painting. The tables were filled with dishes harvested straight from their land, fragrant stir-fried bamboo shoots with garlic and fresh herbs, fish steamed in banana leaves, crisp pickled vegetables glowing in earthenware bowls, and sweet glutinous rice cakes shaped like tiny hearts. The scent of ginger tea and grilled corn drifted lazily on the warm breeze. Quan moved among the guests with surprising ease. He was no longer the distant CEO. He crouched down to show the little boys how to tie vines correctly, laughed deeply when the girls braided wildflowers into his hair, and let the smaller children climb onto his back as if he were their favorite tree. Every few minutes, his gaze would search for Tieu Lac across the garden. When their eyes met, the look he gave her, deep, steady, filled with quiet wonder, made her heart flutter and her breath catch. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in soft peach and lavender, Quan's phone vibrated in his pocket. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He excused himself with a gentle squeeze of her hand and walked toward the far edge of the garden, where the bamboo grew thicker and the shadows stretched longer. Tieu Lac watched him go, a small knot forming in her chest. Something in the set of his shoulders felt heavier than before. After a moment's hesitation, she followed quietly, her bare feet silent on the soft earth. She stopped behind a thick cluster of gourd leaves, hidden but close enough to hear. Quan's voice was low, controlled, the tone he must have used in countless boardrooms. "Tell me again, how certain are we that it's him?" The assistant's voice came through the speaker, tense and careful. "Not 100%, sir, but the footprint pattern matches the old reports. The timing lines up with when you pulled out of that land deal 3 years ago. The one with Mr. Vin. He lost everything. He swore he would make you pay. If he's discovered you're really here, with her, it could become dangerous." Quan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Keep it quiet. Double the discreet checks around the perimeter. I won't let anything touch her. Not now. Not ever." The call ended. Tieu Lac stood frozen behind the leaves, her pulse loud in her ears. The name Mr. Vin meant nothing to her, but the weight behind Quan's words felt like storm clouds gathering behind the mountains. She backed away silently before he could turn, heart racing with a mix of fear and love. When Quan returned a few minutes later, his smile was back in place, though she could now see the faint tension lingering at the corners of his eyes. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together as if anchoring himself to her. "Everything all right?" she asked softly, searching his face. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a lingering kiss to her knuckles, eyes closing for a brief moment. "It will be. Today is about you, about us. Nothing else matters right now." As the sun began to set, bathing the entire garden in a cinematic golden glow, the small ceremony began. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, their warm light dancing across the proud gourd trellis and the faces of the small gathering. The children sat cross-legged on woven mats, eyes bright with excitement. Soft folk melodies played gently, Highland tunes about love, patience, and home, floating through the evening air. Quan led Tieu Lac to the center, right beneath the strongest part of the trellis where the gourds hung heavy and green. He dropped to one knee on the soft earth, the same way he had done in the rain days earlier, but this time in front of their chosen witnesses. The simple diamond ring sparkled as he held it up, catching the lantern light. "Tieu Lac," he said, his voice low, steady, and full of emotion that carried easily in the quiet garden. "In this place where time moves slower, where the bamboo listens and the earth remembers every promise, I choose you. Not for a season, but for every quiet morning, every storm we may face, every laugh with these children, and every night I get to hold you. Will you let me stay here with you? Will you build a life with me? Slow, real, and forever?" Tears shimmered in Tieu Lac's eyes, but they were tears of pure, overflowing joy. The garden seemed to hold its breath with her. She nodded, her voice clear and trembling with feeling. "Yes, Quan, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger once more, then rose and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was slow, deep, and unhurried, a tasting of sunlight, earth, and the beginning of forever. The children clapped and cheered loudly. The adults smiled with warm, knowing eyes. For one perfect moment, the entire world felt right. Later, as night fully settled and the lanterns glowed like fireflies among the vines, Quan took her hand and they danced barefoot on the soft grass. His hand rested at the small of her back, guiding her in gentle circles while the bamboo grove whispered softly around them. He leaned down, lips brushing her ear. "You make this simple garden feel like the whole universe," he murmured. Tieu Lac rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong rhythm of his heart. "And you make me believe I never have to run again." But in the quiet corners of her mind, The fragment of the phone conversation still lingered like a distant shadow. The last guests had long since left, their laughter fading into the night along the winding village path. Only a few lanterns still glowed softly among the gourd vines, casting warm golden pools of light across the wooden tables and scattered flower petals on the earth. The once lively garden now breathed in deep, peaceful silence under the silver moonlight. Tieu Lac and Quan sat close together on the wide wooden steps of the porch, their shoulders touching. The night air was cool and carried the fresh scent of damp soil mixed with the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine climbing the house walls. She had changed into a simple loose white blouse and soft cotton pants, her bare feet resting lightly against the cool wood. The engagement ring on her left hand caught faint sparks of lantern light whenever she moved. Quan wore a dark shirt with the sleeves still rolled up, revealing the strong lines of his forearms. He held both of her hands in his larger ones, his thumbs tracing those slow, familiar, soothing circles on her skin, their quiet language of comfort. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while. The bamboo grove rustled gently around them, as if whispering secrets only the forest could understand. Tieu Lac leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in his clean scent blended with the earthy aroma of the garden still clinging to their clothes. But she could feel the weight he was carrying. It showed in the slight tension of his shoulders and the way his fingers tightened imperceptibly around hers. Finally, she lifted her head and turned to face him, her voice soft yet steady in the quiet night. "You've been quiet since that phone call," she said gently. "I heard part of it, Quan. Not everything, but enough. Mr. Veen, the land deal 3 years ago. The possibility that someone is watching us again." Quan stilled. For a brief moment, the sharp mask of the CEO flickered across his face. Then it softened. He turned fully toward her, taking both her hands in his dark eyes searching hers with raw honesty. "I didn't want tonight to be touched by any of that," he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion. "This day was supposed to be only about you, about us, the garden, the lanterns, the children's laughter. But I also promised myself I wouldn't hide my past from you anymore. Not if we're truly building a life together." He exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting out to the moonlit garden, as if drawing strength from the very vines and earth they had nurtured together. "3 years ago," he began quietly, "before the first time I drove up here, my company was fighting for a major development project in the Highlands. Luxury resorts, golf courses, the kind that could clear entire hillsides and force local families to sell their land for almost nothing. Mr. Vin was my strongest competitor. He wanted that land desperately. When I discovered he was using bribes, forged documents, and pressuring villagers, I exposed everything. The project collapsed. He lost millions and nearly went to prison." Quan's jaw tightened at the memory. "He blamed me personally. He sent anonymous threats for months. Once, someone slashed all 4 tires on my car in the company garage and left a note saying I would lose everything I cared about one day. I thought it was over when he disappeared from the business world, his career ruined, his reputation destroyed. But the footprint near the house, the feeling that we're being watched, my assistant believes it may be connected to him. If Vin has resurfaced and found out I'm really here, living this quiet life with you, he might try to strike at what matters most to me now." Tieu Lac's breath caught. A cold wave of fear washed through her, sharp as the night wind through the bamboo. Yet sitting here on the porch steps with Quan's warm hands holding hers in the peaceful garden stretching before them, the fear felt smaller. Not because it wasn't real, but because she no longer had to face it alone. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "Because I was selfish," he replied honestly, his eyes glistening in the lantern light. He lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "For the first time in years, this place, this garden, our quiet mornings with ginger tea, watching you laugh with the children, dancing with you in the rain, gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. Peace, a feeling of being enough just as I am. I didn't want the ugliness of my old world to touch you, to stain the home we're building here. His vulnerability struck her deeply. This was not the powerful CEO the outside world knew. This was Quan, the man who had patiently learned to tie gourd vines under her guidance, who had let village children climb all over him like a human tree, who had spun her in the pouring rain and kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in his life. Tieu Lac shifted closer, moving until she was straddling his lap on the wide wooden step. Her hands framed his face, fingers gently threading through his dark hair. She looked directly into his eyes, their foreheads nearly touching. "I'm not made of fragile glass, Quan," she said softly, her voice steady even as emotion swelled in her chest. "I once ran to this forest because I was afraid of being shaped and broken by someone else. Men tried to mold me until I felt empty inside. But you never tried to change me. You stayed. You helped me heal the parts of myself I thought were too damaged. You gave me back my laughter, my courage, and the belief that I could be enough, and even more when I'm with you." She leaned in and kissed him, slow, tender, and full of quiet strength. When she pulled back just enough to speak, their breaths mingled. "Now I'm choosing to stay too, with you. Whatever shadows are hiding in the forest, whatever storms from your past try to reach us here, we will face them together. I'm not running anymore, Quan. Not from fear, not from love, not from us." Quan's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest with a quiet intensity. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, breathing her in deeply, the faint scent of garden herbs still on her skin, the warmth that was uniquely hers. His hands moved slowly up and down her back in long, reverent strokes, not with urgency, but with deep affection and a promise of protection. "You have no idea what you do to me, Tieu Lac," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "You make me want to be a better man, braver, worthier of this life we're choosing. Every morning I wake up here, I thank whatever force brought me to this garden, and to you." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped tightly in each other's arms on the porch steps. The lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, sending soft patterns of golden light dancing across their intertwined figures. The bamboo grove continued its soft, eternal whisper, as if offering its silent blessing to the couple who had chosen to root their love right here, among the vines and the quiet earth. Eventually, Quan pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His dark eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "I'll keep you safe," he vowed, his voice low and fierce, yet tender. "I've already quietly increased the security around the perimeter, but more than any guards or checks, I will keep choosing this, choosing us, choosing slow mornings with you, fixing trellises, harvesting bamboo shoots, and dancing in the rain. Every single day, no matter what comes." Tieu Lac smiled through the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming sweetness of being truly seen, truly loved, and truly chosen. She kissed him again, deeper this time, pouring every unspoken feeling into it. Gratitude, trust, fierce determination, and a love that had grown strong and steady, like the gourd vines they had nurtured together. When they finally drew apart, both breathing a little harder, she rested her head once more on his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. "No matter what happens," she whispered, echoing the words he had once said to her, "I'll be here, always." Quan held her even tighter, one hand stroking her hair with infinite tenderness, while the other rested protectively at the small of her back. Outside, the garden lay peaceful under the moonlight, the gourd trellis standing tall and proud, the lanterns still glowing like quiet guardians, the jasmine releasing its sweet fragrance into the night. In that moment, the wooden house and its surrounding garden felt like more than just a sanctuary. It felt like the beginning of forever, fragile yet luminous, tested yet unbreakable, because two hearts had chosen to guard it together. The fragile peace they had found had grown sweeter, deeper, and far stronger than before. Yet somewhere beyond the warm circle of lantern light, in the darker reaches of the bamboo grove, the shadows still waited patiently. For tonight, however, love, patient, protective, and deeply rooted, was more than enough.